All right, hey everyone. Today I have Ahmed with me, and Ahmed is from Egypt, I think.
Yeah.
And since when are you here in Germany, Ahmed? And how do you like it so far?
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for asking. I've been in Germany for quite some time. I'm not really sure. So, probably like 3.5, 4 years.
Mhm,
Moved first to Leipzig, then spent my time in Düsseldorf. Never
mhm.
since. But yeah, in terms of Germany, I really like it a lot. I've been here for 2 semester abroad programs when I was actually studying back in uni. It was always part of the plan
Okay,
after graduation.
that's super interesting. And like, of course, I do some background research before I speak with somebody. I saw that you studied in the German university in Cairo, and that's like super interesting. Did you always have the plan to go to Germany, or was it something that like got built over the time?
Yeah, so that was actually the plan since high school. I'm not really, I mean, back then in high school, you don't really have this full thought process where you go like, hey, this is really what I want to do. This I have my
Mm,
future mapped out. What I wanted to know is I wanted to go to Germany, but at first I was pursuing a different major, and then somehow things changed, moved into software engineering, and then moved here.
I think the reason we are in this call right now is because I wanted to speak to somebody about owning a rental property in Germany, because so far, like all of the things that I have read personally, like they kind of like made me not want to invest too much in Germany, because, for example, the first thing I was reading was about the yields. So if you take a look at the global yields, like Germany, if you're like investing 100 euros inside, you're getting 2 euros out, and that is like when you're lucky. Many times, like it could be like even worse. Sometimes, like you end up buying things which are this Kapitalanlage, so you cannot even like put the tenants out, like unless you want to like use it for your private usage and things like that. So there were a lot of these things, but I don't have a personal experience with this myself, because most of my properties are in Denmark and in Romania. So that's why I wanted to speak to you, Ahmed. So how did you come to the idea of like having a rental property? So where did that start?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for asking. It started with me actually playing around with this online tool. It's a startup that's based in Berlin, and they kind of make this argument of how by staying in Germany, if you plan to stay in a flat for a long time, you're better off really by buying a flat, staying in it, than renting it out after you move after a couple of years. This really got me thinking, and I started comparing ideas with getting a property back at home in Egypt versus getting one in Germany right now. Based on my own personal situation, it made more sense to go for one in Germany, just because property prices in Egypt, even though quite similar, but to get something that you would want to settle in, it would be quite a huge investment. So I thought, okay, let's try to focus on something small, try to create some cash flow here, and then probably use that to pay out another rental property or maybe more of like a home back in Egypt. Um, that was the short story. I started looking for properties in many different cities across Germany, mainly Düsseldorf, Munich, and Berlin. Düsseldorf and Berlin. Berlin's the capital. Düsseldorf, I'm already living there, and Munich is because I have a lot of friends there, and they always complain about how difficult it is to find a flat and how expensive flats are. Uh, to my surprise, the rules of those cities are quite different, even though they're in the same country. The expectation would be if there is a rule in Berlin, it would exist in Düsseldorf,
Yeah.
etc. Um, and this is where I made a few mistakes here and there. But I'll jump back to you so that you can ask maybe more specific questions that can guide the conversation as you want.
Right. Each one of us makes some like stupid mistakes. I think I don't know if you watched this video that I made recently about the my second rent that I bought. What second rental? Second property that I bought at all. No, that was not the second, the third one in Romania. So it was the same complex, and it was like this two-room apartment. And I bought it in a rush. I just saw it online. It looked really nice, and I was like, okay, like it's in the same complex, so I know that this is going to be not bad. And it's on a 10th store and stuff. So I go inside just the day before. So Friday we have to sign it in the morning at 10, and we come from Denmark on Thursday evening at 7. We see the property, and we are like, holding our heads because cracks at the wall and things like that. It's just been 3 years. The complex was built new. So it's like, okay, this is not nice because like now we are already kind of stuck. And the silver lining there was that the owner who was living in the apartment, he said that, okay, it doesn't matter. I'm going to stay in the apartment further. I'm going to rent it out from you guys for the next 1 year. And he's a lawyer. The moment we signed the contract, the moment the money got transferred to his bank account and he received it, within the next day, he just like left everything, like without paying the deposit, without doing anything. He just like ghosted, and he left the key with his employee, and the employee came to give us the key. And like my wife, like she just is really direct, so she was like, what your boss did is absolutely ridiculous and shameless. And like the guy is of course like doesn't want to speak about it, whatever. So there in that renovation alone, like I had to put another 4,000 euros. So these kind of things happen, Ahmed. Like these kind of things happen to everybody, and I think it's very important for us to realize that we are also growing up. There's nobody above us or with us who is like guiding us in these kind of like investments and like experiments. So when these kind of things happens, it's fine, like 4 or 5 thousand here or there, but like this is a learning experience, and you will know that if you had to spend this money, it's going to pain you a lot, and next time you will try not to make that mistake. So don't think too much about it. Tell me about like what is paining you so far, because I see that you really want to speak about it.
Yeah. Okay, so the goal of the process that I went was I wanted to get an apartment and get it for self-use. And in Berlin, there are two types of apartments that you can get: either one that has a tenant already living in it, or one that's free. And the pricing really varies between the two, to the extent where it could go to a 25 or even 30% price difference. And the reason behind this was that it is very difficult to get a flat that has a tenant inside and then ask that tenant to leave, because Berlin is very much a social state, and the tenant can really use any sort of argument to just stay in the flat, especially if they have an old contract. So in my case, I was planning to move from Düsseldorf to Berlin. I found a nice flat. I decided to make a purchase offer. You have a few chances to kind of like visit the flat and speak with the tenant and say, "Hey, are you okay that I'm in here?" Because this is something very important to gauge in the beginning. Because if they're not willing to leave, you're basically screwed, because they can use any sort of argument to stay there forever. With my case, it was supposedly positive, but then after the contract was signed, after the apartment moved into my possession, asked the person to leave, they're like, okay. And then a couple of months later, they say, no, I bought an apartment. I want to renovate it, ask the person living there to leave, then move out. And what the end result is, I had needed to wait for an additional period, so almost an additional year, in order to get the apartment. So, of course, this was something that wasn't planned. That resulted in me paying a lot of lawyer fees and being in a situation where now I am liable to the fact that if the third party decides not to leave, or is in a position that they can financially leave, then this affects the person living in my flat, which affects me, which is a very interesting circle there. And a fun fact, my lawyer tells me that he's been in this profession for 20 years. As he's never seen this situation. So my advice here would be, and this I came to know after I got the flat, there are sort of agreements that you can make with the tenant where you can both agree that this tenant will leave, and you can make them sign that document. If I knew this, I wouldn't be in this position of living in my flat already. So this was the first mistake, and the biggest so far.
Ahmed, just to interrupt you real quick, like this also gives me an idea that maybe the real estate agent who was like in the process was also like not really very transparent and not really telling you like that these might be the clauses which would be nice to have inside, like when they were selling you the apartment.
Yes, of course. And this is, of course, something that I should have done more research about. I was under the impression that the fact that there is a real estate agent and there is a notar in the middle, that all the legal processes are transparent and equivalent to both parties. I thought this was sort of mandated by law. But if we talk from a legal perspective, they didn't give me any false information, but it just wasn't the full absolute picture of what can happen here and there. This is why also another learning would be, if you go through with such a process, you should always make sure to have your own lawyer that will review the documents just to make sure if there are any loopholes, make it safer for you rather than for the other party. There's also one that I didn't mention. Of course, if the building already exists, you should always make use of someone called a Gutachter, which is basically a person that will verify the condition of the building and the flat, just to make sure you're not putting your money into something that's not really worth it, especially when the building is not a new build.
Watch this channel called like Vermietertagebuch, and this is a German channel. It's like this guy started with like talking about his real estate properties in Germany, and I think he has like 54 of them. I think right now he has like 73 or something. But the thing with this is that he bought most of his properties with loans right away. So his actual cash flow is very, very less. So like even with 73 properties, the profits he's making is like extremely low, like maybe 1,000 or 2,000 euros, something like that. But like he definitely has all of this headache. So like from there, I know that like even with Gutachter, you really have to have luck to find a good Gutachter, because it is also possible that like, you know, these people are not good themselves. And I think like you never realize like every single part of the puzzle which can go wrong, like unless you buy something. And because like when you're telling me this experience right now, I feel very spoken to, because it's like it's my own personal experience too, to an extent, because the same story, like, you know, with the entire thing with the tenant, for example. And even though he signed the lease, everything is signed from both ends, whatever, and he said like he's going to like put it inside, but the tenant said like, yeah, we don't need to like, you know, put this in the purchase contract that I will be living there for the next 1 year. We can make another contract, because of course he's a lawyer himself, so like he knew that like he can say that, and like, you know, maybe it can go through.
Even clarifying those terms would also help you negotiate the purchase price of the property, especially at the current state where the interest rates are quite high compared to a year.
For me, like I was just saying that there, for example, like turns out the story that like I had to invest 4,000 euros in the apartment, which I wouldn't have to have invested if the guy stayed there longer, right? Because I have to rent it to somebody new then. So he's like, till the time you get the 750, and till the time you are like actually getting this guy to the court or whatever, like getting him to pay you, like he said like he'll be paying at least like 2,000, 3,000 euros more. I think like in the entire rental scenarios, this is also a very important thing to know. But about your experience, Ahmed, now like this is also what I saw, that like when you are going into an apartment where somebody's already living, I feel like you're a little bit more hesitant, right? You don't want to like, you know, pull the sheets, you don't want to like bet him, and like you want to look under, like, you know, what's going on, or like, you know, put the curtains to the side and see like if there are like cracks and things like that, because there's somebody living there and it's his apartment. Like how was the experience for you when you had to meet somebody who was living in your apartment which you're going to buy later?
Experience was quite new to me. But in terms of actually checking the state of the apartment, I'd say that the person was very cooperative. And I think this is because they legally have to be this. I mean, for example, when I took over the apartment, this is a clause that's in the contract that was created a very long time ago. So they legally have to, of course.
So first of all, like how did you find the rental property, Ahmed?
Yeah, so I used a lot of portals. I don't know if I can share exact names or not.
Like ImmoWelt and ImmoScout and all of these, right?
In this example, I used ImmoScout, which is free account, and so that part was interesting. But also, there are a lot of groups on Facebook where people would also advertise their flats. Now, the problem with those is that you won't get a steady stream of this, because if you can find a person that's selling their own flats, you're gonna save the real estate fees, where they're, I mean, best case scenario, that's only 3.5%, which is a big chunk, depending. In my case, I was looking for self-use rather than capital unlock. I had some terms that wouldn't work for me, and my intention is to move into the flat in the first place. Things that I had mapped out at the beginning, like what areas do I want to find flats in, because it was very important for me to find a place that is central, because the intention is self-use.
And about the Airbnb, so what are the regulations that you maybe read so far about Berlin? Because I know in Hamburg it's extremely difficult to put up or Airbnb. So tell me a little bit about the situation in Berlin.
Yeah, so for Berlin, and I mean, first I have to start. I'm not an expert there. When I did the research around how to actually get an Airbnb license to rent your flat in Berlin, there were too many regulations. There were restrictions against how many days per year you can rent your flat out. I think the last update I read was it has to be less than 3 months in one full year. Uh, which really gave me the indication that, okay, this is something I really want to move away from. The scenario that all the people that I know that have rented flats in Berlin and are renting them out to generate income, they're going with short-term furnished flats. And the restrictions here are minimal, but the bright side is there is no capping of the rent that you can actually charge. So it becomes a free market. It's all about the supply. The only restrictions is you can't rent it out to tourists. They have to be people who are moving for long stay visas. And there are certain conditions about renewing the contract. So if you write a contract with someone for a year or two, once you renew it, this becomes automatically an unlimited contract, and then it's no
Mm,
longer a furnished flat, and you have to apply to the Mietbremse rules, and it
okay.
becomes a completely different story, which is not quite economic.
I believe you. For the people who are like maybe new or like don't know about the entire system in Germany, can you explain them the Mietdeckel in Berlin?
Yeah, so Mietdecke, well, it's supposedly a law, but it's not really normalized.
Mm,
This is actually quite funny. But essentially, the short version would be there is a central index that is released about the meat prices or the rent prices in different areas per meter, building year, the size, the type of renovation that exists, whether it's on the luxurious end or more on the basic end. You have a specific price per meter that you can charge from a person who's living in a flat, and you can only deviate by 20%. The problem here is this index is quite historic, so it's really detached from the actual market prices in these days. So I have friends who are moving recently to Berlin. You would see rental prices that are quite high, that are actually not legal if you're renting with an unlimited contract. Very famous services, and this is something that a lot of people who are moving in are starting to do, where they just take out a flat contract and then they go to companies like what they do is they will review the rental details, and they will raise a case for you to change the contract to adhere with the meat decal, and then the rent ends up being reduced heavily, and the contract becomes changed into an unlimited one, which is very
mm.
risky if you don't really have your paper sorted out.
Okay, so like this is, you mean that the person who is renting your apartment can go to this company and say, I'm getting charged more for my rent or something, and then they help you reduce the rent, or like, I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
know.
It's
Okay.
it's a new legal startup that just opened up. You as a person living in an apartment, you don't need to do anything. You just
Mm,
give them your contract, you tell them I'm paying this much. They'll review it. If they can get you a discount because your contract is not applying to the meat decal,
mhm,
then what they will do is they will raise a lawsuit. They will ask your landlord to lower the rent, and they will
mhm.
just keep a share of the money that your landlord needs to pay back to you. Yeah.
That's such a fucking nightmare. How did you come to know about that?
I came to know about that through Facebook, and it's one of the things that I came to know after I got the flat. I'm like, okay, uh, this is
I
basically.
definitely know something about this. Like I know, like when you were living in Sozialwohnung, like in the very starting in Hamburg, when Alina was in her Ausbildung. I was also a student, so our combined income was, I don't know, like maybe 1,000 euros. From that, 550 euros was going for rent and stuff. So we were not qualifying for anything else other than a Sozialwohnung. So we
Mhm.
were living there, and like, of course, then we also took these kind of things where there was a lot of construction happening. Like, you can uh, go to some. There were also similar startups, I remember at that time. Like, you can just like ask them to like that this is a situation, and then on behalf of you, they write to this Wohngenossenschaft, yeah, like that this and this has to be reduced to this and this extent. Now on the other side, like now as a landlord, I can understand the pain. Like this is like the not a nice situation. Now, of course, like right now we are talking about that Mietdeckel and things like that. From this, people are getting the idea that the prices are really low for rent in in Berlin. So what is the yield for you right now? Like how much rental income are you generating and how much did you ended up paying for the apartment?
Yeah. Yield, I have to recheck my Excel sheet. I don't really remember, but now I'm not really making any money out of it. What I'm
Mhm.
actually taking advantage of is tax benefits that I get out of it because there is the interest rate on the mortgage that I could use to reduce the income that comes out. And then there are the renovations that I plan to do after the tenant move out. I can actually also move part of that cost out of the taxes that I need to pay. In addition to this, it would be I forgot it. Yeah, the depreciation on the building itself. So
Yeah.
if you buy a flat in the building that is I don't remember the exact year, but 1952 or 1948, something like that. You can cut down 10% of the cost by removing 2% each year. And it's very important to highlight here that this is not really what you pay for the apartment. There is this very complicated calculation that your tax advisor can do. I don't really understand how they do it, but they come up with a number and then you can take 2% out of it every year for 10 years maximum, as long as you're renting. Um, you can also write off some of the acquisition costs of the flat as long as it's rented while you acquire it. These would be, let's say, translator fees, your level of German language, because most notars will really ask you to have a translator unless you are absolutely fluent in a native, because this is a legal requirement. And of course, all the fees to really find the flats, commute here and there, depending if you're looking in different cities, the states, etc. The usual. Um, so this is mainly actually how I'm making money of it, or let's say trying to break even.
I can show you one example, and I think like for this I share the screen with you, and like maybe we can go through this together and see like how much do we understand from this. When I was like doing all of the calculations for myself, I was like really happy. Okay, like I'm getting 6.5% of yield, and that's really nice because for an apartment that I paid 98,000 euros for, that's a studio. I put 20,000 euros for the entire, getting like 600 euros per month from that. And the recent one that I told you about, where I had to invest like 4,000 euros extra, like the total cost came out to be 107, and I'm getting 750 euros extra. And like these are the two that we actually took over today. So like the yields are not bad at all. Like we are going towards like 5.2%. And this is like with the furniture and everything inside. But if you're just going to like, maybe talk about the cost of the apartment alone, then like this gets even better. So here that would like go towards like 5.8 or something. So for Romania, it's been pretty nice. For Germany, when I take a look at the examples right away, so for example, one good example I found was this. This is near a city in Hamburg, and it's a Hochhaus. And you see that the price is like what, 150,000 euros, a three-room apartment, and they have some kind of like photograph and stuff already showed here, which is like looks really like normal to me, like nothing special. Like you really cannot like charge a lot of money for that
Mhm.
in any case, right? Like the kitchen looks, the interiors in general don't look that great at all. And every single time you're buying a Kapitalanlage, so here's like langfristig gute Kapitalanlage, they generally give you more of the details. So, for example, they're talking about die Wohnung ist vermietet und erzielt eine jährliche Kaltmiete von Euro 7.043,52. So 7043,52 divided by 12 is around 586 or 587 euros, right? So this is really interesting because like when I'm in Romania, like putting something for what, like 90,000, so 118,000 euros. So for 30,000 euros lesser money, I'm getting 20 euros per month rent more. And again, like this is a capital city, so of course, like things are really nice there. But comes further details here, and like that's what I wanted to discuss with you. So like about the house geld, um, do you know the story with the house geld? Because what I read is like this is something that you're paying monthly in a common fund for all of the people who own the apartment, because you own the apartment right now, like a rental property. So like were there some other costs that you had to like also calculate when you were like taking a look at all of this scenario?
Yeah, so the house geld is definitely a very important part, and what I can say is for that particular apartment, the house geld is quite high. So, for example, in Berlin, I pay half of that, and that includes heating costs. I don't know if the heating is central in that building or not. Uh, so, house geld is split into several parts. One part is shared, goes into a central fund for the building, and this is used for those big maintenance projects that might come up down the line, like fixing burst pipes, painting the building, improving the courtyard, etc., etc. Another part goes to the running costs of the building, so the cleaning, the electricity, if there's an elevator, the electricity bill for that elevator, as well as all the costs that go to the building management company, from the annual. I forgot the name. I think it was the
This
Eigentümers.
Wohnungseigentumssammlung, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Mhm.
Basically, it is an annual meeting that shows what economic plan do they have for the next year, and this is mainly just a big balance sheet of I'm estimating we're gonna pay this, 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 and that, and
Mhm.
it should be enough, etc. And they also discuss problems that have happened with the building. So these can be things like a garage becoming overflown with water, and you want to look out for those because if those exist, this means that the Hauptgeld will be substantially higher because there is a loan that the Hausverwaltung took to fix those problems, and you're already
Mm.
in, into that interest. And it also gets quite political and tricky because each person in the owners association gets a share based on, let's say, the total area that they own in the building, which is obvious, but then it's difficult if you go into a building that where the majority of the apartments are bought by one company. Basically, it becomes a show where they decide the things that will be worked on, and usually they won't really care about the building itself. Exit. Maybe they don't want to do this big fix, so they vote against it, and then you can't really force them, even if it's something that damages the investment itself.
Yeah, that's definitely not nice. And the house scale thing you said, like from what I read online, was that this is divided exactly by 50%. 50% is paid by the and 50% is paid by the person who's renting the apartment. How is it in your situation?
In my situation, it is similar, uh, but there's also a trick, or let's say, kind of a funny situation that happened over the previous year. It's because house geld includes the heating because the building has central heating for where my apartment is, and of course there's been this sharp rise in the heating costs, and then you have a choice to sort of decide to pass this cost right away to the tenant, or let's say divide it and then settle the balance at the end of the year. And this is a tricky process that also requires the involvement of lawyers, because if you go to the tenant and say, "Hey, I'm going to pay double the house bill just because the heating prices doubled this year and I don't want to pay in advance," they will go to the Mietverein and they will bring in a lawyer into the picture saying, "No, it's too much." And in my personal scenario, I'm ending up covering for this. balance out the sheets at the end of the year.
And I think like that's also the reason why I was thinking during the COVID times and stuff. I think like the people who got maybe screwed over the most were people who were very heavily leveraged, bought a rental property or something, but not have the means to like cover the cost for that rental property. I think that's why it's also like super important. Like what I say is like if I cannot have money in cash for the next 12 months of rent for that apartment, I think like then it's not a nice thing to like invest inside. But okay, that's super interesting. So from this I get the idea that like when you're making any kind of like calculations for, I don't know, like, thinking about buying a particular kapitalanlage, you of course have to also like definitely ask about the house geld, because that will reduce what kind of profit you're making in the end. Because if you're paying like 40 euros, so like half of that, the yield comes with somewhere around like 2.6%, which kind of makes sense because that's like the general yield in Germany these days. And also sometimes like what I have seen is in Germany, when I was like thinking about investing, before going towards the direct, like, buying some like individual properties, I was really thinking that it'd be so nice to have a big complex with 12 apartments right away. So like this kind of like whole house, not a whole house, but just like a broader property which has like different apartments. I thought like if I want to take loan, if I want to go into debt, like this is something I'm going to go in debt for. Because and this brings inside like two problems. Like first one is like you can say, okay, like this is a massive cluster risk because all of your properties are in one single place, and if something goes wrong with the entire building, then you are the only person who is going to take care of all of that. On the other hand, it's like, okay, like, but if it goes well, then it's going to be running really, really nice. So that was something that I was definitely taking a look at, because when I was thinking about like buying properties in Romania first, I was like, okay, Romania, I don't know at all. Germany, I still kind of know a little bit and I can understand the language, and I think it would be better for me to like buy things here. But when I started doing like more and more research, like it just became like really unattractive for me to have like many properties, because I also understand that in Germany, the tenant has a lot more rights somehow than the landlord. What has been your feeling so far with this entire like legal drama which is going on?
Well, definitely the tenant has way more legal rights than the landlord, which came off as a quite the shock and the surprise for me. I mean, I did my research beforehand, but I didn't imagine that it was up to that extent where basically the tenant is in control. So, for example, I'm in a situation where uh, my tenant is also staying longer because the tenant bought a flat that they want to renovate, and they're delaying their move out date because they want to do the renovation. And basically, I am paying for this, even though I still need to do a renovation after the
Mm,
move. But they're in the position of power. So yeah,
mm,
and what doesn't really help, of course, is the flat in a city where the majority of the judges or like the political parties are more left-oriented, then
mm,
it becomes a little bit of a political battle because you need to think that this case would be very much towards the perception of the judge, and no one would want to go against the general trend of the political party in the city. So
mhm.
those are aspects that also impact you that I wasn't aware of. But yeah.
Do you find it a little bit difficult sometimes, Ahmed, that like, for example, us like who come to Germany as expats, as migrants, right? Like who have capitalist tendencies, or like who want to build wealth, who want to be financially free and so on. I've seen that like most of these people, like if you would like just do a completely left or right.
Definitely confusing, but as a person, I like to be somewhere in the middle. So having a
Mm,
strong social system is definitely something that's very important because it kind of ensures that anyone who needs help will have someone to help them. This is
mm,
very important. It's something that I really like about the. I think finding the balance where being somewhere towards the middle so that you don't end up driving the investors or that are kind of driving the economy in a country. They can't do this, then you don't have enough money for the welfare system, and all kind of collapses. So somewhere in the middle is always the way to go.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Did you hear this news about this entire Enteignung going on, like this Vonovia, or there were like some bigger companies in Berlin, and there were some protests going on that like these larger companies own so many of the properties in Berlin, and we should like take away the properties from these private companies. Uh, were you aware of that news?
No.
Okay. So this is something you should check into after the call. So there's like Enteignung, Berlin, Vonovia, and you'll come up with some very interesting articles. So there was a huge debate about this. There were two major companies in Berlin who had almost 6,000 apartments in total, and then the people started demonstrating that like the state should buy off, or like the state should kind of like steal their apartments because they have too many of them, and then they should like lower the rent prices to the social system. And then there was a debate, like, if you do that, like, do you really think there are going to be like more builders coming into Berlin? Like that's the stupidity that I find sometimes, like when it goes like too like left leaning and like just steal everybody's private properties, let it make the communal property, things like that. Like that's just a little bit too far for me.
Yeah, and I mean, you start thinking, is that really ethical? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, most of the people, for example, like you start with the larger companies and then it gets trickled down to the smaller and smaller people, like who kind of like also saved money aside to buy a property or something and were looking forward to it, or were relying on it for their rent or their pension afterwards. So that is something that I personally find a little bit difficult. Coming to that, Ahmed, like, how do you find the rental property till now? What were the costs involved so far?
yeah, that's a good question. I won't be able to answer the full story of it because I didn't finish my tax document after I purchased the flat. The taxes that are, let's say, regulated and quite easy to calculate. You have the Grundsteuer, which is basically a tax that you pay based on the land value of the
Mhm.
property. And this is usually not a large number. For some people, it increase by more than 50%, but it's still a small number. When you try to acquire the flat, this is where you pay the biggest chunk of the taxes, where you pay the Grundwerbsteuer, which is basically the tax to transfer ownership so that you become enlisted in the Grundbuch, or kind of like
Mhm.
central registry that says who owns which piece of land. There it really differs from city to city. So in Berlin, I think it's 6.5%, if I'm not wrong. But then you have other cities. So for example, in Munich, it's lower by 1 basis point, if I remember correctly. I don't remember the numbers. It's been time. So this will be the biggest chunk. Um, in addition to the other Nebenkosten, which will be the real estate costs, as well as the money that you'll pay for the notar, which is also heavily state regulated. So that accounts to 1.5% for the notar, and for the real estate agent, it's mostly 3.5%. On very few properties, it could go up to 7%, but there are a lot of regulations that need to exist in order for the real estate agent to be able to charge that much. This puts your upfront costs to somewhere around 10% if you want to buy a property for self. If you want to buy it solely as a Kapitalanlage or an investment property, then the banks would require you to have an even bigger chunk of upfront costs, where you need to finance about 20 additional percent as a down payment rather than side costs. And it's also important to know that the side costs are normally not things that you can write off from your taxes. So you will be paying 10%, and you should kind of plan that the equity gain as well as the rental income offsets that, so you can really be gaining some value out of this.
So 10% is something that you have to like keep in mind. All right, like 300,000 I'm buying, so like you have to essentially like shell out from your own pocket. Yeah, that's interesting. I think like in Romania we have the cost of around like 7%, like what I have seen so far. But like this is like including the real estate agent costs and all of these things combined. And otherwise, like the notary cost is also like 3%. which I find funny. So this time when I had to take over the apartment, I had to get a power of attorney. Even for that, in Germany, I had to pay the cost. I had to pay 0.5% of the entire cost of the properties that I'm 340,000 euros. These were two apartments with two underground parkings. And I just did not see the sense for a 2-page document, which is just a power of attorney. It is not even a signing thing, whatever. You have nothing to do with purchasing the thing. That like for that also the cost is given as a percentage and not as a fixed cost, not as 50 euros, like 70 euros and like, things like that. That is something I find like notaries to be the biggest mafia somehow. The money that they earn, like I just don't, I cannot make sense.
I only met them once for a quick 30-minute signing where they read the contract and then they emailed the documents to my house. That's it. And they ended up taking 1.5% of the cost. And this is from me. So I don't know what the seller commission is, but I guess it's something around the same number.
Yeah, I totally understand. But this has been a pretty nice experience so far. Ahmed, like, are there some like final thoughts that you have in mind that people should watch out for when they're like thinking of buying something in Germany?
Final thoughts. I mean, I would speak about Berlin and maybe like, let's say,
Yeah.
risks that people should be aware of as well. So we talked earlier how, let's say, the biggest yield can be achieved if you go with the approach of renting out a furnished flat. It's kind of like important to realize that right now, this is also a sector in the government in Berlin is also trying to regulate. So these regulations to have licenses like Airbnb. So my advice would be really keep a close eye on the news and be aware that this is a risk that might happen if you decide to go for a property in Berlin. Yeah, so
Mm,
if it's not self-use, really think about it.
yeah. No, that's definitely very interesting. I think this has been one of the most detailed conversations that we have had on Brandwise anyways. I've never done an interview, so this was the first one. But I'm very happy, Ahmed. I think I learned a lot of things from you. For everybody else watching this video, thank you so much for joining in. I hope you learned something. And if you have any kind of questions whatsoever, just write that down in the comment section and we will take a look at them afterwards. Thank you, Ahmed.
Thanks.